It kind of feels that I may have been wrong about Starfield's exploration gameplay. The more I play the game, the more exploration feels, well, disjointed. Do let me know in the comments section if you've noticed the same. Now, in my video from September, I spoke about the nature of exploration in Starfield. The fact that I enjoyed the way you can roam planets and have various encounters. I also discussed how it took me a bunch of hours to really warm up to the game. I think I said something like 20 hours maybe. Yet it's a weird thing. I found there's a point in Starfield, a place that I really can't put a time marker on, but what happens is that exploration almost suddenly feels disjointed. It's a hard thing for me to explain, but that is what I'm going to attempt to do in this video, and it might be a bit of a rambly video. Ultimately, my main focus is whether I was wrong about my initial assessment on exploration in Starfield. And whilst it certainly works for the first few dozen hours, after a certain point it just feels, well, broken. So I'm going to need to go through a few different things to explain all of that, and to start with, I should probably explain what I look for when it comes to exploration in a Bethesda game. First though, before I get to that, I want to point out that this video is not about me hating on Starfield. There's already a lot of that going around, and I certainly don't need to add to that. For what it's worth, I actually do like Starfield. But I hear you ask, if I like the game, then what is the point in this video? I mean, I either like the game or I don't, right? Well, it all comes down to how I play Bethesda titles. For me, the main quest is never the main appeal, and I mean, yeah, I play the main story, but that's not why I buy a Bethesda game. The thing I really enjoy about Bethesda titles is their open worlds that feel alive, rich and vibrant. The fact that each individual part of the game feels intimately connected to every other part of the game. This in turn makes exploring a very powerful experience in Bethesda titles, because you're exploring in a highly connected and reactive world. Skyrim is an amazing example of this, but so too are the other Elder Scrolls titles, as well as the Fallout ones too. Now, I lost count of the amount of times I could wander around the frozen wastes in Skyrim, or maybe randomly head deep into a forest. I would do this with no goal in mind other than to see what is over the horizon or beyond the next ridge. Inevitably, there would always be something interesting. Sometimes a small settlement, other times a campsite or ruins, and other times still a dungeon. Now, what made these discoveries so special is that it always felt that I was uncovering an important new part of the world. Even if in the grand scheme of things another small cave didn't really change anything, it nonetheless revealed a new hidden corner of the world that I before this point hadn't seen. Another part of the history, another part of the life in Skyrim, and from time to time I'll discover a powerful artifact there, or perhaps unlock an unexpected quest line. So when it came to Starfield, I was expecting more of the same, but on a far larger scale thanks to the hundreds of worlds. After all, the Bethesda form of exploration seems perfectly suited to an open world space game, doesn't it? And for a while, it certainly felt like that was a perfect fit. As I discussed in the original exploration video, there's plenty to like. Landing on new moons, checking out the 3 or 4 points of interest near the landing locations, some of which included NPCs that would give quests, or maybe I would find interesting buildings and structures. I mean, I got dozens of hours out of this sense of exploration. So on the surface, it all feels a lot like exploring in Skyrim or Fallout, just on a different scale. So, what changed for me? Well, this is a tricky one to answer, and I'm sure people will feel that in any game, and any game that gives 100 hours or 200 hours of gameplay is certainly worth the money, and I'd agree with that. Value for money certainly isn't the issue when it comes to Starfield, far from it in fact. But the question I keep asking myself is why, after thousands of hours in Skyrim, does that world still feel interesting and alive, even if by today's standards it's very much dated? Why do the wastes in Fallout 4 and even Fallout 3 still feel as though they contain adventures many years after release? Well, as it stands today, right now, at this moment in time, Starfield doesn't seem to have that, at least not for me. Now, I'm sure that eventually this will change. With updates, fixes, DLC, mods, and most importantly time, Starfield will be a vastly improved game compared to what it is today. But again, I must emphasize that I don't see Starfield as a fundamentally bad game. Yet, unfortunately, it is a game, for better or worse, that is extremely disjointed, and this has had an interesting effect upon exploration. Now, I'm not sure where to pinpoint the exact problem, and it may be a collection of different things, so I'm going to go through a variety of different thoughts on this, and whilst I do so, why not let me know your thoughts on this subject? So what I do know is that Elder Scrolls and Fallout worked very well for this, and over the periods of hundreds if not thousands of hours, not to mention years as well actually. Each of those titles did this successfully from day one, without updates or mods, yet Starfield is unable to deliver this same feeling for me. Fundamentally, the gameplay mechanics for Starfield are pretty much the same, more or less, as those other titles. Ultimately, they are full-on Bethesda. I'd venture then that my problem is not with the game mechanics themselves. So the one thing that is different with Starfield is the scale of the game world. 1,000 planets is a lot of space, but I'm used to that in Elite Dangerous as well as No Man's Sky. I don't think scale is a problem, at least not directly. We know that planet surfaces have boundaries, invisible walls. I've only ever once encountered these, and that was when I intentionally set out to do so. Invisible walls then are not the cause of my dissatisfaction with exploration. But what about loading screens? Well, this one has been a big issue for a lot of players, and for me the loading screens certainly interrupt the flow of the gameplay. I'd go as far as saying that they make the game world feel they make it feel very disjointed. But the game world feeling disjointed is very different to exploration feeling disjointed, at least to me, and I'll explain why. So when I'm exploring on the surface of planets, I'm walking around looking for things. Loading screens only ever happen when I enter a large building or a cave or other type of area like that. So whilst the loading screens are certainly an issue for the game overall, that is a separate issue. They aren't affecting my experience of exploration. So what does that leave? Well, you will remember when I discussed Skyrim, I mentioned how I loved finding that remote isolated cave in the middle of nowhere, or a singular campfire and a tent alongside a river or a road. As I said, those things mattered to me because they felt important. While small, they are still an integral part of the game world. They matter because they are a piece of the Skyrim puzzle. That camp or abandoned building that tells a story. Either one left in text form in a document or a book, or a story told by an NPC. And if neither of those, then a story I create myself based upon where the camp is situated or the ruins actually exist, or whatever inhabitants reside there. Now this can be extended to the culture and the race that built those areas. Every area feels largely unique based upon the race that resided there or created them. There's a sense of myth when discovering ancient ruins long abandoned by long-dead races. There's a sense of dread and calamity when finding a more recent modern structure created by the currently living races. A smashed or burnt down house, what does that say about the family or the people that lived there? A cave full of desiccated, rotting corpses. Who knows how many thousands of years they've been there? Whether you're playing Skyrim, Oblivion, Morrowind or the Fallout games, the same is true. Each discovery tells a story. They're relevant and related to the various cultures, races and parts of history. Each of these discoveries has a meaning, sometimes a very deep one, because they're directly and intimately tied into the game world, the game lore. And even if you're the type of player that has absolutely no interest in the lore itself, you can't but help notice the richness of these locations, the fact they all each matter to the world. So yeah, all of these discoveries, all of these places to explore matter because I'm discovering a part of life in the history of Skyrim, or the history of Oblivion or Morrowind, or even the Wastelands and what went on before the war and the resulting catastrophe after that. When it comes to Starfield, it's a very different story. Now don't get me wrong, there's some seriously impressive bases and settlements in Starfield. It's not that these areas are poorly designed, far from it in fact. Some of them even have their own unique stories. Yet, and this might just be me, but when I land on a planet, bring up the scanner and locate 4 or 5 points of interest, it all just feels so artificial, as though the game has placed these locations there just for me to find. And the truth is, it feels that way because that is exactly what has happened. These random points of interest, whether caves or bases, don't exist as a part of the Starfield game world. In fact, they didn't exist at all until I landed and the game procedurally created them for me. It's impressive technology for sure, and technology which leads to a huge game world. Yet for me at least, it means that the game world isn't alive in the same sense as Skyrim, Oblivion, Morrowind or Fallout. That cave in Starfield isn't a remote part of the game world that tells a story. It wasn't hand-placed there by a developer with creative aspirations, and in terms of lore it has no reason to exist beyond being something random for me to find. If I go to the Sol System or Alpha Centauri, I don't find any locations that speak of humanity's first foray into the stars and the initial settlements. In fact, there's no settlements that are hundreds of years old, clearly are hundreds of years old and abandoned, with different aging technology created by a very early foray into space. As I travel further into space, the other settlements that I find, the other locations, bases, whatever these may be, there's no distinction between whether they're created by the UC or the Freestar Collective. In short, these places don't tell a story, they have no history, they have no reason for being. They're simply bland, consumable content that was placed there just for me to discover. They're not individual components of a rich, larger tapestry. I'm not sure why it took me so long to realise this with Starfield, but the moment I did realise it, the illusion of exploration in the game completely fell apart. The truth is that I love to explore game worlds that tell a story, whether that's the flow of a river, or the rise and fall of an abandoned settlement, or even an NPC that has a particular issue with a nearby town. In Skyrim, all of this works because all of those fixtures are permanent. They exist as an established part of the game world. And that, unfortunately, is not true when it comes to Starfield. While sure, there are fixed points of interest in Starfield that are always there, these places are, for me at least, not where my personal interest resides when it comes to exploration. The sad thing is then that when it comes to the type of exploration I enjoy the most, Starfield simply doesn't have the type of areas that I do enjoy. That then is a fundamental problem for me, and I'm not entirely sure it's a fixable one. Maybe at some point in the future, Bethesda will either notice this and deliver a far wider variety of procedural content and perhaps make some of it more permanent, or elsewise the modders will have a field day with this and deliver a whole range of history, a tapestry that Starfield desperately needs. Meanwhile, I'll certainly continue to play Starfield, but it's just a case that it's not the game of exploration that I was hoping for it to be. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments section, I'd love to hear your take. Meanwhile, do check out the other videos on the screen right here.